It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Brian Skian, who's Director of Child and Adolescent Training and Director of College Mental Health, who will introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Rothschild. It is my pleasure to introduce one of our senior fellows, Dr. Prerna Moorjani, today, who will be our grand round speaker, talking about digital therapeutics, new frontiers in advancing mental health. Dr. Moorjani graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry, magna cum laude from Rutgers University in New Jersey, where she received a grant from Sanofi Aventis to pursue undergraduate biochemistry research for 2 years. And had her work published in the Journal of the American Chemical Society in 2011. In 2016, she actually matched at the Albany Medical Center, where she did the first 3 years of her general psychiatry training before transferring and joining our general psychiatry training program here for her 4th year, where she served as a chief resident. In between that, she did some work at Worcester Recovery Center and Hospital as an attending before returning to fellowship as a child and adolescent fellow 2 years ago, and will be graduating this spring. While she was in between her years in training at UMass, she worked with Dr. Cochran in the Can Do Clinic, pursuing her interest in working with children and adolescents with developmental disabilities. And it has also had the opportunity to manage a geriatric psych unit at Worcester Recovery Center and Hospital. So she has really taken care of people across the spectrum. And today we're very excited to hear her talk on digital therapeutics. And I am pleased to announce that she will be staying on at UMass and working at our crisis stabilization unit with CHL. And so without further ado, Dr. Moorjani, thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. My talk today is about the fascinating landscape of digital therapeutics and its vast potential to become the new frontier in advancing mental health. So let's take a dive. I have no actual or potential conflicts of interest in relation to this presentation. Some objectives I'd like to outline. First of all, I'd like to outline the role of digital therapeutics in healthcare, and then hone in on its applications in the mental health world. Identify some current trends in therapeutics, some clinical indications for them in specific mental health diagnoses, and looking at some ethical considerations in regulatory standards, and how those can then guide prescriptive practices. The world has witnessed an explosion of digital health over the last decade, with the emergence of social media platforms, smartphones, and mobile apps, wearable devices, real-world evidence studies, and the likes. With healthcare becoming more digital, patients today are more empowered than ever before. As a result, digital health solutions have become the need of the hour. To keep up with this increasing number of empowered patients participating in their own treatment decisions. So let's define digital health. The term digital health applies to all the technologies that engage patients in their health and well-being, and includes concepts such as mobile health, telehealth, smart devices, sensors and wearables, health information technology, and personalized medicine. The simplest digital health solutions generally consist of either an app, a website, or a device. So the bottom of this schematic, you would see some examples of digital health technologies. Because they do not provide a direct impact on care delivery to patients, they serve as consumer-grade lifestyle companions or patient educational programs, wellness apps, and so on. They don't need a high degree of integration into the care delivery infrastructure and are seldom part of the treatment pathways. On top of the schematic, you'll see more of the digital therapeutic solutions that are out there in the form of software. These affect the treatment journey. They may be highly integrated into the existing care delivery infrastructures. This means that these solutions will often span different interfaces. such as software, web applications for doctors, an app for patients, a way to work, share, and make sense of all the data that's captured. The fact that these solutions can affect patient outcomes means evidence requirements will be the highest. And there is a great impact on the care delivery that leads to higher cybersecurity concerns and more need for continuous improvement. So I'd like us to know the term digital therapeutics and what it actually means. Even though DTX is what I call it, or what it's recognized as, is a part of the digital health domain. Even though DTX is part of the digital health domain, it is different from diagnostics, it's different from telehealth and other digital health products. According to the Digital Therapeutic Alliance, a DTX product not only has to be software driven and backed by evidence, but should also be able to prevent and manage a disease or a disorder. They're used independently or in concert with medications, other devices, or other therapies to optimize patient care and health outcomes. The DTX industry often refers to DTX applications as clinically validated, rigorous, focused, FDA approved, depending on the situation. Therapeutics mimicking the product development path of pharmaceutical drugs are often referred to as software as medicine or behavioral medicine in digital format, which basically indicates online or mobile delivery of skills-based psychotherapy techniques. We'll go through some examples. DTX relies exclusively on algorithms for its mechanism of action, as well as the algorithmic information management, both of which make it easier to generate, collate, and analyze the health data. So this schematic serves to categorize the different functions of DTX based on whether it is A, used to treat a disease, B, used to manage a disease, or C, used to improve a health function. Firstly, whether it serves any of these functions, DTX needs to deliver a therapeutic intervention and use clinical endpoints for the product's indication. Along with it, they undergo clinical trials and have to demonstrate ongoing evidence. If a DTX, however, is designed to treat or manage a disease, that's a different ballgame. It is at a medium to higher risk for medical claims and requires a higher degree of regulatory oversight. Most importantly, if designed to treat a disease, that specific DTX will need to be prescribed by a healthcare provider. So what are some of the digital therapeutic applications? These are evolving at a much faster rate than I can speak. Digital therapeutics have a wide variety of applications. They come in the form of wearables that connect with consumer electronics to track and capture data and communicate with patients. They can come in the form of digital sensors that interface with medical equipment, such as tracking blood sugar levels, picking up wireless signals from a sensor embedded in the patient's skin. They can use gamification. They can use cognitive or motivational stimulation through gamification to promote behavioral change, thereby preventing the onset of a chronic disease. And this one is one of my favorite applications. It's the virtual reality application that has been utilized in patients with burn injuries going through really painful bandage changes. Snow World is one such application. What it does is pretty cool. It shifts the patient's concentration away from their pain to an icy virtual environment bathed in a cool blues and whites, where the only task is to throw snowballs at an endlessly advancing group of penguins. It might seem silly, but the results speak for themselves. Burn patients experienced 35 to 50% less pain when immersed in VR, about the same reduction as a moderate dose of opioid painkillers. I'd like to show you a video that highlights fMRI studies that have shown changes in the brain to pain perception as a result of VR.
So this is what it looks like when it's in action in a hospital, and it helps us access and activate all of those abilities that we have. So we can use a functional MRI scanner to look at the brain and see how the brain handles pain with and without VR. Now, there's a collection of areas of our brain that is called the pain matrix. And that includes the insula, the thalamus, and the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex. And you can see in these pictures, with no VR, just pain and stress, we see a lot of activity in those brain areas. Now, with VR, we see two very interesting things. One is that these areas of the brain, the pain matrix, becomes much quieter, and you can compare those images and you see a big reduction in the brain activity in those areas. And then we see a shift. We see that brain activity move to other parts of your brain, such as the frontal cortex, associated with positive things like problem solving and concentration. So these are significant changes in your brain, and they suggest that with plasticity and
that is just one example of VR. There's tons, many more that are coming into the market as we speak. The DTX landscape is evolving and showing great promising results in medication adherence by helping people optimize the benefits of conventional pharmaceutical therapies. So, for example, a DTX company in the US has developed a robot to nudge people to take their medications on time, intending to overcome the challenges of adherence. Another area of great interest in the DTX world is how these therapeutics can drive behavioral change at a large scale. For instance, a 2002 study showed us that a systemic behavioral intervention targeting diet and exercise through face-to-face communication substantially reduced risk of developing type 2 diabetes. This finding led to the development of similar lifestyle change programs in the US, which are approved by the CDC. And several DTX companies are developing ways to deliver such behavioral programs digitally to reach more people. So let's explore the history of DTX and how did this term DTX really evolve? The concept of technology-mediated delivery of therapeutic cares to patients outside the conventional setup like a hospital or clinic was first developed by Dr. Joseph Kvedar in 1995. The initial idea was to overcome the restrictions of time, place, and personal limits that a physician may face while providing effective medical care. This concept by Dr. Kvedar is the fundamental base of today's therapeutics. Then the term e-patient came about in 1999, was provided by Dr. Tom Ferguson. E-patients refer to those who are equipped, enabled, empowered, and engaged in their health and healthcare decisions. With an increasing number of e-patients in today's world, the need for digital health and therapeutics has really become inevitable. So can therapeutics really revolutionize medicine? Psychiatrists have begun exploring clinical use of novel mental health technologies. The COVID-19 pandemic has expedited clinical adoption of these novel technologies. And overall, treatments that incorporate video gaming, behavioral health apps, and apps that collect survey and phone sensor data appear feasible and acceptable to young patients. However, the recommendation of a particular technology really relies on cautious and calculated decision-making. So during the last quarter of the 20th century, pioneers in digital innovation have developed the earliest software programs engineered to support wellness and the treatment of different diseases. By the turn of the century, advances in technology, coupled with the growth of the internet, began to unlock the potential for DTX to improve care and deliver strong commercial opportunities. So my timeline here shows how investment in the sector has increased. There's rapidly that's leading to the establishing of first companies dedicated to the clinical research and new product development in the sector. So you see WellDoc getting FDA approval for its diabetes management system in 2010. Proteus Digital also earned its clearance for ingestible sensor in 2012. And then Therapeutics received its FDA clearance to target substance use disorder in 2017. And this is one of the products I will be discussing in more detail. Pear also has its other product, for chronic insomnia called Somryst, that was cleared in 2020. So during the past 2 decades, several companies have successfully advanced DTX programs to the final stages of review and approval. So let's take a look at the rapid growth of DTX trials over the past decade. Study titles containing the word digital were first registered between Jan 2010 and December 2019 and were searched on clinicaltrials.gov. Of the resulting 557 studies, 182 were determined to be interventional trials, DTX. And out of those 182 studies, 167 trials were registered with clinicaltrials.gov in the past 5 years. And during this time, when the number of DTX application trials increased more than 5 times, from 12 in 2015 to 58 in 2019. With respect to therapeutic areas under investigation, the highest percentage of trials have been conducted in psychiatric indications, you can see from this graph. And there's really strong evidence supporting digital cognitive behavioral therapies efficacy in this area, followed by cardiovascular, endocrine, addiction, neurology, and respiratory. 77% of DTX trials conducted over the past 10 years have been sponsored by academia, which has dominated research all across the therapeutic areas. Currently, there are various products available in the market for a wide range of mental health conditions. And here are some of the diagnoses that are being treated with DTX in the corresponding medtech companies that are releasing products. I will be describing in further detail Achilles product for ADHD and the Pear Therapeutics product to target substance use. But I would like to take this time to briefly touch upon a DTX product called Freespira, as you can see from this slide, the third one from the left. And this particular one was FDA approved to treat patients over 13 years old with PTSD and panic disorder. And what it does, it really aims to normalize the respiratory irregularities, which is the key physiological driver of anxiety attacks. It incorporates a proprietary sensor, physiological feedback display, and coaching to train patients over 28 days. And over the 17-minute treatment twice daily, it normalizes breathing patterns, which has been shown to eliminate or reduce panic and specific PTSD symptoms in multiple clinical trials. So here's a glimpse of some of the DTX products with corresponding indications and their respective clinical phases towards FDA approval. The one that really stands out is Pear. Pear's lead product, Reset, was the first DTX to receive authorization from FDA to improve disease outcomes. And its other product, Reset O, for the treatment of opioid use disorder, was the first to receive breakthrough designation and authorized in December 2018. Its third product, like I had mentioned earlier, was reviewed through the FDA software pre-cert pilot program, which I'm going to talk about in more detail. So what does it take to be a digital therapeutic? A digital therapeutic must adhere to these 10-point list of core foundational principles, which I'm not going to read out the entire list, but the ones that I'd like you to know is that it should produce a medical intervention that's driven by software. It should incorporate patient privacy and security protections. And it really needs to publish trial results that's inclusive of meaningful outcomes in really recognized peer-reviewed journals. The Alliance, the DTX, the Digital Therapeutic Alliance, has a product library of DTX. And this list can be really essential for physicians, helps differentiate DTX that physicians can prescribe from unregulated apps that overpopulate online app stores. So the first one that I'd like to mention is the Endeavor. FDA, in June 2020, the FDA permitted the marketing of Achilles' product, Endeavor RX. It's the first game-based digital therapeutic to improve attention function in children aged 8 to 12 with primarily inattentive or combined type ADHD. It's the first game-based therapeutic granted for this condition. So without further ado, I'd like to just show you a video of what it looks like for patients.
It looks and feels and operates like a video game. What's happening, though, every moment of the experience is the user's being thrown challenges and have to navigate obstacles and sensory input that are uniquely tailored through an algorithm to stress the user's attention abilities in a really specific way. It's meant to be constantly stressing where a child's weakest and moving that over time, but doing it in a way that's engaging and has rewards and goals associated with it. It's based on exactly what the weak spots of attentional processing are in the front part of the brain, and is specifically designed to overload that processing system with multiple stimuli. And so the early science was around elucidating exactly what's happening in the brain to people when they pay attention or when they're distracted. And that evolved all the way into our design team testing algorithms to personalize that stimulus for everybody who's using the treatment.
Okay, so I want to talk about the study associated. Okay. So the AKLT01 is designed to target attention and cognitive control through an action video game interface via at-home play for 25 minutes per day, as the video suggests, 5 days per week for 4 weeks. In the STARS ADHD RCT, they recruited 857 patients and 348 were randomly assigned to receive AKLT01 or a digital control intervention. Patients who engaged with Endeavor X demonstrated improvements in a digitally assessed measure of sustained and selective attention measured by TOVA, which stands for Test of Variables of Attention. Endeavor RX demonstrated improvements in ADHD impairment measured by the impairment rating scale, with responder rates ranging between 48 to 50% after the first month of treatment. And then they had a subsequent trial that followed these patients using the application for the second month of treatment, and they found a 68% responder rates. In this, so the major take home, Endeavor RX is only available through a prescription, is not intended as a standalone therapeutic or a substitute for medication. An enrollment activation code is generated for patients after their provider sends a prescription to a specialty pharmacy. And upon completion of registration and payment with the pharmacy, patients' parents or legal guardians will download the Endeavor RX in the App Store and Google Play and apply the activation code to begin treatment. And once they receive the one prescription and payment will enable a patient to receive about 3 months of access to the treatment. And I looked up on their website, it costed about $99. It would be interesting to know if insurance can cover for that as well. So the next DTX product I'd like you to introduce, I'd like you to meet Woobot. Woobot is a fully automated conversational agent that is geared towards young adults experiencing stress and wellness difficulties. You may have heard about the Woobot through different platforms. There is a lot of empirical support for Woobot which stems from an RCT, included young adults only. Woobot is accessible via mobile devices through an instant messenger app. And I'd like you to really meet and get to know Woobot without me actually having to describe Woobot to you.
Need to get something off your chest? Meet Woobot, the friendly little bot who's ready to listen 24/7. Woobot's been trained in cognitive behavior therapy, an approach to mental health that is all about identifying distortions in your thinking. Woobot doesn't do therapy, but he can be your guide to help you figure out things on your own. Oh, and he's effective. Some nice people at Stanford University demonstrated that chatting to Woobot for 2 weeks led to significant improvement in mood. Every day he asks how your day is going, how you're feeling, and what you're up to. He builds an emotional model of you over time and can help you see patterns in your mood. As he learns about you, he'll teach you things, like useful strategies and practical tools that have been shown to work. You're not troubling him at all. Honestly, he has nothing else to do. So let Woobot annoy his way into your heart and start feeling better today.
After I learned it's Woobot, not Woobot, I just realized, oh, okay, Woobot. So Woobot Health receives FDA breakthrough device designation for postpartum depression treatment. So Woobot has now been incorporated as a digital therapeutic in treating PPD, and it is really an investigational DTX that's delivered over 8 weeks. It's not out in the market yet, and this is delivered by a patient's smartphone. It combines CBT and elements of IPT with a deep understanding of the lived experience of PPD, and it is prescription only. It features the Woobot, and they did studies on Woobot's ability to form human level bonds to support engagement, and they had good data to support the level of human level bond they could form through working alliance inventories. So just a quick information about breakthrough therapy designations, really intended to expedite the development and review of devices intended for life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating diseases. So it's really to help expedite the development and review of these devices. So we will hopefully be seeing Woobot in the market. And I would like you to see what an interface with Woobot chatting with patient with postpartum depression looks like. So I'm going to have you see that video and check it out for yourselves.
Woebot's utterances are on the left-hand side in white and the users is in green on the right. And sometimes there are quick response buttons like this, and other times Woebot is inviting open text response, which is denoted by the pencil emoji. So the next part of the conversation moves on to the sort of mood check-in. So Woebot asks how the person is doing, and we always anchor the conversation here because depending on the answer, we want to respond to how they're doing, and the subsequent way that we engage would be different. This user says they're sad, and when Woebot asks why, the user shares that they're having difficulty bonding with their baby. Now, we've spent a lot of time very carefully crafting the empathic statements here, which are very personalized, very elegant, because we find that this is one of the most stigmatized elements of postpartum depression, the failure of the mother to bond with the baby. But of course, it is one of the key maintaining mechanisms of the disorder itself. And one of the things that we noticed when we talked to postpartum women was how important it was to normalize these experiences for them. Because of course, women with postpartum depression are not talking to other women about this. And so they don't actually know that this is common and experienced in other ways. And this is interesting. Woebot is actually normalizing their relationship with their baby against the other relationships in their life and saying, it's just like that. You can work on things. There's things that you can do here. Also note that Woebot is understanding this is an ongoing issue for mom. He says, you brought this issue up to me before, and I'm so sorry it's continuing to be tough for you. The fact that you're here, you keep trying. So we're always providing positive reinforcement for effort. And then Woebot issues an invitation to go ahead and work through a technique together that is focused on creating an opportunity for mother-infant bonding. And what I think is really well illustrated here is just how unique it is that this mom can actually lie down with their baby on their chest and go through this technique together. And this is extraordinarily difficult to achieve this kind of in vivo practice in traditional treatment. And when the
I found this video very impactful. Although the field of human-computer interaction is still relatively nascent, initial observations have suggested that some AI identity archetypes induce responses in humans that might give rise to better working alliances than other archetypes. So there is further need for research in this area. And this is a display of what it would look like. The third digital therapeutic I'd like you to know about is Reset. The approval of Reset was an example of the rigorous standards in clinical research applied to many DTX products. FDA approval for Reset came after a 12-week clinical trial of about 399 patients and 10 outpatient addiction treatment programs. The study found that the use of Reset app in conjunction with in-person counseling improved treatment retention rates and abstinence rates. And of the patients using the Reset app, about 40% were abstinent by the end of the study, compared to 17% in a control group that did not use the app. And in the clinical research to support Reset-O, which is the therapeutic that targets opioid use disorder, but 82% of patients treated with buprenorphine in conjunction with Reset-O remained in treatment at 12 weeks, compared to 68% treated with buprenorphine alone. So there's significant differences there. Patients who did adhere to Reset module completion in the first 6 weeks of the trial were 7 times more likely to complete treatment than those who did not. So how does this work? Reset delivers therapy based on the community reinforcement approach. This CRA is an intensive form of validated neurobehavioral therapies for substance use disorder. And it also uses contingency management, which basically reinforces positive behavior with rewards. Also uses CBT to help them learn new skills and that support positive behavior change and prevent relapse. And the fluency part of this training helps reinforce what is already learned. The prescription duration for this one is 12 weeks. Reset is also, it's comprised of 62 interactive modules, 32 core modules, and 30 supplemental modules. So each module is completed in approximately 10 to 20 minutes. So what really is the patient perspective here? The ubiquity of smartphones means that the clinical applications of digital phenotyping and DTX are highly scalable. Their use allows individuals' data to be used as their own unique baseline. And research has demonstrated the feasibility and acceptability of physiological data capture for various disorders. The hope is that digital markers of behavioral change, that is observable changes in sleep, physical activity, social interaction, they all might become sensitive measures in functional status, in identifying symptoms and risk for adverse outcomes in patients, which could better guide and personalize care. Research has shown also that individuals are more willing to disclose personal information to a virtual human, as doing so lowers the fear of self-disclosure and stigma. And this may be particularly important in adolescents who prefer online or mobile tools over face-to-face interactions and tend to fear the stigma associated with seeking traditional mental health services. Of course, their DTX is also available in multiple languages and lessens inequities in healthcare, especially for the underserved. Clinicians have been wary of adopting DTX into their clinical practice. And you can tell that given their unfamiliarity, lack of time, lack of systematic integration with EMR, and the limited capacity for billing. There's also system level challenges of DTX that includes cybersecurity. DTX interfaces with multiple non-medical entities. So patients and clinicians are quite reluctant to transmit sensitive health data over insecure channels. I would like you to know that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services has established a new medical code for digital behavioral therapies, and this was effective April 1st of 2022. This is important information for you to know that it's also used for services outside a healthcare provider's office. So how does software really meet regulatory standards? Software as a medical device is increasingly being adopted in the healthcare sector. These devices are developed and designed iteratively. In 2017, FDA recognized that the current device regulatory framework enacted by Congress more than 40 years ago had not been optimized for regulating these devices. So the pilot explored some innovative ways to conduct regulatory oversight of medical devices. And this was, the pilot was formed in 2017. The regulatory landscape surrounding DTX is still in flux. The pilot was a first step to inform development of an adaptive regulatory approach. Based on the observations from the pilot, which is discussed in this report, the total product lifestyle approaches and key findings, FDA has found that rapidly evolving technologies in the modern medical device landscape could benefit from a new regulatory paradigm that would require a legislative change. So I'd like to explore some top ethical issues with you about the concerns surrounding digital mental health technologies, which really include safety, accountability, privacy, data protection, transparency, consent, and bias. Let's analyze safety and oversight. Digital tools that rely on machine learning rely on these machine learning algorithms that can be quite difficult to determine why specific data inputs led to a certain output or findings, and makes it hard to address systematic problems in the outputs. There is a lot of criticism that the FDA Digital Software Pre-Cert program has received, especially because of their less stringent standards than those used for pharmaceuticals. And notably, machine learning and digital health technologies raise issues of racial bias and fairness. Bias includes data sets that do not have representative samples of the target population. So if the research population for creating the tools is not sufficiently representative of the diverse context in which DTX will be used, it can lead to worse outcomes for certain groups. Regarding privacy concerns, data brokerage is a $200 billion industry. The current landscape of data brokerage and sharing presents more concerns for protection of patient data. Computer analytics make it possible to draw behavioral health inferences from seemingly unrelated information like location data. And these inferences can lead to negative ramifications for patients. So how do we address these ethical challenges? Some of the future directions for establishing safe standards will involve looking at a systems view regarding how a digital tool will be used in the healthcare delivery system rather than regulating the digital tool itself. Developers allowing for third-party review of algorithms really will help improve transparency. In terms of privacy laws should really include provisions for compliance with HIPAA security rule. And of course, patients need to appreciate the risks and benefits involved regarding the data collected through an informed consent process. Access and strategies to assess how well DTX designs address needs of diverse populations are needed. And there needs to be improvements in the infrastructure and the training to better serve low-income demographics. Frameworks for how digital therapeutics can address preventative care, patients in crisis, or special populations also need to be developed and implemented. If we can meet these ethical challenges, then digital therapeutics will provide not only innovative, but also equitable mental health care. So in the next 5 to 10 years, digital innovations and therapeutics may actually become a paradigm-shifting change in healthcare. And we'd expect to see big waves in the mental health field and the introduction of therapeutics, and seeing how scalable it is another story. So some take-home points for us. Solutions will start becoming more and more relevant in terms of either supplementing or complementing current treatment. There is wider development and adoption of digital solutions. In order for that to happen, the technology will need to reach maturity and evolve, but the evolution of the industry as a whole will also help in getting most people familiarized with this technology. Patients will need to appreciate the risks and benefits, like I mentioned, to an informed consent process. Doctors and hospitals will have to evolve in understanding and prescribing these treatments. Regulators will need to develop sophistication to evaluate digital solutions. And really, the development of DTX is an area that affects everyone, patients, clinicians, payers, policymakers. And really, it's a very exciting field. It's a wide scale of digital interventions, and DTX is really on the horizon. So thank you so much for being here.
So we have a lot of questions online, but priority goes to the room.
Thank you very much, Prerna. That was really interesting. It was a nice presentation. If I may, I just want to make a couple of points with regard to digital interventions, because that's actually what I do in my research. It really stinks when you have a ringer in the audience. So I think you gave a really nice presentation of some of the interventions, the digital interventions that actually have data to support them. But unfortunately, most of the apps that are out there, especially the ones that are free, but ones that are very low cost and not FDA regulated, have zero theory and zero research behind them. And it really creates a problem for both practitioners and for patients because, you know, they have to dig through this really wide array of, you know, apps and interventions, even TMIs, which are text message interventions, such as the one we're developing, to come up with something that actually is effective. So having an FDA approval is helpful. What APA has actually been advocating is to come up with a database, which would be searchable by clinicians so that actually you can look at what's out there and what the evidence is behind that for these tools.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I think you often see is the ones that are really academically based are not as sophisticated in terms of the widgets, the avatars, et cetera, et cetera. And the ones that are not academically based, or, you know, the ones that have been picked up by industry have, you know, better tech to them. So there's a nice review in AJP. You may have seen it a couple of years ago about digital intervention. So that's helpful. The second thing I would say is the data suggest that when you use digital interventions, if they're curated, if you actually are working with a therapist who is walking you through the digital intervention, such as Kathy Carroll's intervention for substance use disorders, her relapse prevention interventions, that the outcomes are far more superior than standalone interventions. There certainly is, you know, people have explored whether there's transference to digital interventions, and there is transference to digital interventions, which is really interesting. But the curated ones appear, and that may be because the modal number of times that a digital intervention is used is 1. So, I mean, if you have somebody who's curating it, then you're much more likely actually to have, you know, the intervention that's used. And then the final thing I'll say for people in the department to know about, and some of them may be online, is we have some really talented investigators who are working in this space. So Dr. Megan Kelly, who is at the VA, has an app she developed for what is it? It's not abstinence, it's in commitment therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. And somebody in her lab is also, Erin is working on robots to keep company with vets who are older and help them take medication. Martha Zimmerman, who just got a KL2, she's a new faculty member, is developing a text messaging intervention, which we call a TMI, for perinatal individuals who have anxiety or at risk of anxiety. And then Laura Kelly, who will be joining our group at iSpark this summer, and this is helpful to you to know about, is developing an app for adolescents who use substances and are suicidal. And it has very sophisticated background an avatar and the whole, it really is very, very cool. So I'm sure she would be very interested in collaborating with you at CHL and other people at CHL. So when she gets here, I will give you a call and let you know about that, because it would be
Please
great.
let me know.
Yeah.
I would add to that,
Appreciate
Wendy
that.
Marsh is going to be starting a study using this Wobot for PP or postpartum depression.
The Wobot,
Wobot.
is that the is it British or Australian? Australian.
Yeah, I think so. Other questions in the room?
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I have a question about the privacy, data protection, and security. It seems to me that the term you use was should have, or ought to have certain kinds of protections, but we know that that will not happen in industry from that end. I'm wondering if there's an important role for the profession in terms of whether it's diagnosed or billable or endorsed on an APA resource, whether from the professional end, we have to put the criteria or the requirements for it to be endorsed or utilized, because we know data migrates, it's acquired, companies change, and so on. Informed consent is an empty phrase. We all have gone through those privacy links so that we can handle our privacy, 5 pages of condensed legal language. So I think that's not adequate. And I'm wondering if from our end, we really have a duty to make it carefully limited, the data acquisition or retention. Maybe it shouldn't be retained.
You can hang on to it. Did you want to respond to that, or?
No, thank you for saying that. I just feel that the research I was going through was still very preliminary in terms of how they'll address these privacy concerns. And I would be also concerned on many levels with the issues that you brought up.
I think it's not just privacy with regard to industry or whoever owns the program, but it's also privacy in the household. So in research settings, one of the things that we have to make sure is if somebody is using an app or TMI, that if somebody sees this is an open screen or walks into the room or whatever, that or say a spouse picks up somebody's phone and there's a text message on it, that it's benign enough or secure enough that it won't be a problem. Like in the perinatal world, people may not even know that the participant is pregnant. So if she gets a text message about anxiety or depression during pregnancy and her partner or her mother or father doesn't know she's pregnant, it's a little bit dicey. So you're absolutely right about the security and the confidentiality of it. And it takes a lot of thought. And it's not just who's at the other end of the program, but it's also who's in the actual environment at that time.
Dr. Clifford, one of our residents, presented today on domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and one of the apps, the My Plan, actually has an escape button, which is great. So that kind of thing may be an important standard.
So speaking of Dr. Clifford, she has a question. If a patient disclosed that they were suicidal or another psychiatric emergency emerged, how would AI respond to that, and what are the legal ramifications?
I don't have the answer to that, and I'm sure there is a lot of research going on to help address these issues via certain platforms. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? I think Dr. Maloney would be a great person to answer that.
I have a 1986 answer to the question. I actually worked with an intern once. We had an interactive voice response system that gave a PHP 9 way back in the day. And I remember having to work on the module for how does 911 locally get alerted if a person's score is way too high on the last question about suicidality. So I think it's been discussed and researched for a pretty long time, and that's part of a lot of the thinking that goes on behind these apps. Is it foolproof? Is there a safety net? Does it really exist for all these apps? I think there's a lot of screen out questions, right? Endeavor's not going to take suicidal ADHD kids.
Right.
So I think it's handled at both ends, but it's probably not a perfect system, right?
The legal ramifications are, I would predict in 2023 that the manufacturer of the AI and the person who prescribed it will get sued. All right, more questions. Given,
Can
oh,
I
you want to,
respond?
yes.
Sorry. You've activated the chair bot here. So the dirty little secret with the regard to research is that you fall into the don't ask, don't tell domain. So the PHQ-9, a lot of screeners eliminate the suicide question, and a lot of the depression questionnaires eliminate that. So if it's spontaneously recorded, what you can do, and for example, what we're doing is we're putting up, we're sending texts about resources where people can call a hotline, and there's a special perinatal hotline for SI as well. And then follow-ups with that. But unless you have a two-way intervention that's curated, even with geocoding on it, there's really nothing that you can do. The only thing you can do, and the thing that placates, unfortunately, IRBs is the don't ask, don't tell. So it is a big problem.
Dr.
I was just going to say, I imagine.
Why you need to be in the room for grand rounds.
This is why Dr. Yonkers wants everybody in the room for grand round so that you can hear these questions. I was just going to add that I wonder politically too, in some states where it's not even safe to talk about abortion or pregnancies or anything like that, that could be a real risk with the privacy and security issues, that if a company even resides in a state where that is illegal, that regardless of where that therapy is conducted, it could be problematic. And so even in the current landscape with transgender healthcare and women's healthcare, I think it's something that the digital security is paramount for all of these issues.
It's true.
One last question. There's so many online. How does FDA approval differ between pharmacologic and non-pharmacologic interventions? Do these products need to go through the same requirements as a pharmacologic intervention?
That is interesting. That's beyond the scope of my presentation. I did not look up the ways a pharmaceutical goes through FDA approval.
Okay, I'll give you a quick answer. It's different, and it's not as rigorous. Let's go one more question. So a previous slide said Wobot must be prescribed under provider supervision. I'm wondering how the provider gets involved, and how curious how the Wobot handles safety screening, which I think we touched on already. For example, postpartum psychosis. Would the provider be notified that these topics were brought up on the device?
So I did not come across that in my research. This is an investigational digital therapeutic at this point, and all the different ramifications involved in excluding people who are not going to be the right candidate for receiving this therapeutic will need to be discussed, and it'll have to be determined on a case-by-case basis.
Can I activate the chair bot? What if there's a surprise? What if the postpartum woman's...
So if you have a curated intervention, right, then somebody gives permission in advance that if there's clinical deterioration, that they will take some sort of measures to make sure that the individual is protected, just as you would in psychotherapy. In research settings, we always consent people, and the consent can include, it typically does include language if there's a clinical deterioration that we will report this to your practitioner, or we may, we may evaluate you immediately. These interventions, I don't know what the FDA approved ones do. They have the capacity to ask for permission at the beginning for somebody to contact if the person is running into trouble. They probably have just what I was talking about before, the 888 numbers that they can tell people about, but if they're standalone, they're going to be very limited. But the curated ones will have the ability to include the therapist who is working with the patient.
I just want to add, these are not standalone digital therapeutic devices. They're not prescribed by themselves. They have to be prescribed with a team and professionals involved in their care.
Well, thank you very, very much. This was very, very interesting. It's a whole new era. I'll just add one little thing as an experience as a journal editor. One of my editorial board members, who's an expert on clozapine, asked GPT to write a paper on clozapine, and it made up references, including by this fellow. So you have to have I think a human being involved with this to make sure things are going correctly. But thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for being here. Appreciate your time.
Very